I have the honor to declare open the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It is indeed a great pleasure to warmly welcome you all here today. And in accordance with the customs of Indigenous peoples and in recognition of the peoples of these lands, we will now have a traditional ceremonial welcome by the traditional chief of the Onondaga Nation, Tadadaho Sid Hill.
All the people listen carefully. It's become my duty to pass these words along of Thanksgiving. The first thing we do is the Thanksgiving address. With the number of people, no matter the number of people gathered here, we all come of one mind and we greet each other. Peace and contentment to each other, and we'll let it be that way in our minds. And so now it's true. The Creator has set this earth, whom we call our mother. She helps us, we help her, and we are thankful for what she has planted here, what was planted, and it still grows to provide for us. And so we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to our Mother, the Earth. We'll let it be that way in our minds. And so now we give thanks also to everything that was put here, what was set down for us on this earth of Mother. And the main reason that all these were put here was so that we can be at peace and contentment, all of us, as we walk about here on Mother Earth. We kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to the Creator for everything He's put here. So we let it be that way in our mind. And so now we look at the gentle winds that come. The great reason the winds come, they carry water. The thunder beings carry the water here and help all that was planted here. So we kindly and respectfully give a great gratitude to the winds and the thunder beings. So we let it be that way in our minds. And so now He's separated things. He's given each duties. We all have duties. The plants all have duties. All the beings have duties, including the thunder beings, including the plants that were put here, and the four-legged animals that run about. And also, we share our gratitude to the sky world. With our grandmother, the moon, is a great responsibility, and also the stars, who are still carrying on their duties and guide us through ceremony. So we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to the sky world that they're still working for us to guide us. So let it be that way in our mind. And also the four beings in the sky world. They have the great responsibility to be with us at all times, in our minds, in our hearts, and they guide us here on earth as we walk about here on Mother Earth. And so they also know that they can guide us in our thoughts, in our ways, and that we will never be alone as we walk about here on earth. They're here to protect us. it's still going on, what they put down here, the duties they have to keep us at peace and contentment as we walk about. So we kindly and respectfully give a great gratitude for them for still carrying on their duties. And so now we could direct our thoughts to this message that came to us and into the future so that we would be at peace. The message was delivered to us. It will help keep our minds straight as we walk about here. And then as we do things to help each other, we are guided by this messenger to work together. And we'll put it in our minds and give a great gratitude for this messenger. So let it be that way in our mind. And also now we direct our thoughts to Creator who has set things down here for us before we even walked about here at this time. And so by daytime and by the nighttime, He has set down this great love He sends to us. It's never ending love. And this way that we communicate with Him is by helping each other. And so we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to our Creator that these things are still going on as He has set down here so that we can be at peace and contentment as we walk about on earth. Let it be that way in our minds. Donato. That is all.
I thank the traditional chief of the Onondaga Nation for your words of welcome. We shall now proceed to the first item on the agenda this morning, which is the election of the chair for this session. And I would first give the floor to the distinguished forum member, Mr. Rodrigo Payalef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the pleasure and the honor to nominate Ms. Aluki Kotier as chair of 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Payalef. And I would now give the floor to the distinguished forum member, Ms. Emma Rosonte Patu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As expert member from Aotearoa, New Zealand, nominated by Indigenous people's organisations, I would like to second the nomination of Ms. Aluki Kotier as chair of the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. She has my full support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So may I then take it that it is the wish of the members of the Permanent Forum to re-elect Ms. Aluki Kotier from the Arctic region as chair of the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues by acclamation? Thank you. I wish to extend my warmest congratulations to Ms. Aluki Kotier on her re-election, and I'm confident that she will also guide this session of the forum to a successful conclusion. So with that, I would like to invite Ms. Aluki Kotier to take her seat on the podium to preside over the remainder of the proceedings of this meeting.
Ularay Nukun, Tavavusi, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, Your Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Lok Bahadur Thapa, President of Economic and Social Council, Your Excellency Mary May Simon, Governor General of Canada, Ningiukuluk, Ms. Bjorg Sanjay, Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination, distinguished members of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, distinguished elders, delegates, Indigenous sisters and brothers. I open this 25th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues with deep respect for our peoples and a firm commitment to our shared responsibilities. I begin by paying my respects to the Onondaga Nation, the stewards of this land, and by expressing our gratitude to Tadodaho Sid Hill, the traditional chief of the Onondaga Nation, for his generosity in welcoming us to their territory. Let us also thank Katisha Star Rose Paul, also known as Quicks Ivsau Little Angel from the Sartlip and Little Wat First Nations, who accompanied us with grace into the General Assembly Hall. Her performance is a paddle song that recognizes the journey that we are all on together and provides strength to the global Indigenous peoples as we all work with one heart and one mind, and was composed by her family, who is Coast Salish. I express my gratitude to my fellow members of the Forum for their confidence in electing me to serve as a chair for another session. I acknowledge the continuing members and also welcome the new members of the Forum who have commenced their tenure at the beginning of this year. I also acknowledge that 11 members of the Forum are women. In March, as the members of the Forum, we gathered together for the first time in Ottawa, which is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I am deeply grateful for the unequivocal support of Inuit organizations, Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, Inuit Taperi Kanatami, and the Inuit Circumpolar Council to ensure that a pre-sessional meeting was held. At that pre-sessional meeting, we reaffirmed our collective commitment to the mandate of the Forum to realize the rights of Indigenous peoples across the 7 socio-cultural regions. Amidst these challenging times of increasing constraints to participation and reducing resources, I thank each of you for traveling from every part of the world and overcoming the many barriers to be here today. I welcome each of you, especially my Indigenous brothers and sisters. Your presence here in the halls of the United Nations honors the foundation laid by our ancestors and elders to maintain and defend this crucial space that amplifies the voices of Indigenous peoples, including those that are not here with us. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, this year we reach an important milestone. 25 years since the Permanent Forum first convened here in New York. It is a time of reflection. The discussions held at the Permanent Forum amplifies the voices of Indigenous peoples from the 7 socio-cultural regions. It is a powerful example of the intersection of Indigenous solidarity and multilateralism at the international level. Over 25 years, through this vital platform, Indigenous peoples have and continue to generously contribute their lived experiences, both the challenges they face and the solutions they offer. The discussions that take place in these halls over 10 days are not just words. They culminate in recommendations that have made lasting, impactful change. This year's theme is ensuring Indigenous peoples' health, including in the context of conflict. Indigenous peoples continue to face health inequities regardless of where in the world they live, experiencing shorter life expectancy, increased likelihood of chronic illnesses, and alarming rates of suicide. The degradation of Indigenous peoples' lands, territories, and waters directly contribute to these poor health outcomes. We hear from our brothers and sisters from across the 7 socio-cultural regions of the devastation of mercury contamination, the impacts of climate change, the inability of mobile Indigenous peoples to practice their traditional practices of pastoralism and shifting cultivation. These inequities are compounded by discrimination, racism, the absence of cultural understanding and sensitivity, and the lack of services in Indigenous peoples' languages. As Indigenous peoples, health and well-being is more than just physical and mental health. It is interconnected with our culture, spirituality, languages, our lands, and our environment. Health systems and the understanding of health by society must be decolonized to acknowledge this interconnectedness and incorporate the holistic self-determined approaches to health by Indigenous peoples. We call on states and the UN system to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples to their traditional medicines, food systems, healing, and practices observed over generations, including Indigenous birthing practices and midwifery. A continued and growing threat to the health of Indigenous peoples is conflict in all forms. Conflict is not confined to armed conflict, but also manifests in the legacy and continuation of colonization, the exploitation of lands and waters for resources, including critical minerals, the dispossession of land and the absence of recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. As geopolitical tensions intensify across the world, we are seeing that the impact of armed conflict on Indigenous peoples. It is displacing Indigenous peoples from their lands and territories, disrupting their ways of life, culture, livelihoods, and ability to care for their environments. Conflict also causes a surge in human rights violations perpetrated against Indigenous peoples, and in particular, Indigenous women. Pertinent to these conflicts and the health of Indigenous peoples is the concerning increases of threats to Indigenous human rights defenders across the world. Indigenous peoples continue to be subjected to reprisals, criminalization, intimidation, threats, killings, and enforced disappearance, simply for protecting their lands and advocating for their rights as distinct rights holders, many of whom are Indigenous women. Inflicting harm on Indigenous human rights defenders inflicts harm on peoples as a collective. The forum urges states to take the necessary steps to ensure the rights, protection, and safety of Indigenous leaders and human rights defenders. We urge states to address human rights violations as a matter of priority, guaranteeing justice and reparations to those Indigenous human rights defenders that are victims of violations. As we mark this important milestone of convening the 25th session of the Forum, the dialogues that will take place over the next 2 weeks will highlight some of the most pressing matters facing Indigenous peoples today. The interregional, intergenerational, and global dialogue will discuss the enduring and pressing matter of climate change and how it impacts Indigenous peoples. The human rights dialogue will provide a critical opportunity to engage in dialogue with the other Indigenous mechanisms of the UN, highlighting the human rights situation of Indigenous peoples globally. I take this opportunity to acknowledge that this year marks the 20th anniversary of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Excellencies, friends, as we look ahead to next year, we will commemorate the 20-year anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Permanent Forum is one of 3 vital platforms that amplify the voices and aspirations of Indigenous peoples at the UN, was key to the adoption of UNRIP. Indeed, a key outcome of the forum's inaugural session 25 years ago was the bold call to states to, and I quote, adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples before the end of the decade. As we celebrate 2 decades since the historical adoption of the UNRIP and reflect on the progress made thus far, we must collectively remain steadfast in the promise to see its full and effective implementation. I call on member states to continue to invest in multilateralism, including by working in partnership with Indigenous peoples as distinct rights holders. Amidst the backdrop of the UN 80 reforms, I call on member states to strengthen the participation of Indigenous peoples and that of the Forum as a key mechanism for the advancement of the rights of Indigenous peoples. As we approach 20 years since the adoption of UNRIP, I call on member states to honor their commitments under the declaration and to actively implement its articles into domestic law and policy. I urge UN entities to double their efforts by continuing to embed Indigenous peoples' rights at the core of their work and to use tools such as the System-Wide Action Plan on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples not as a mere checkbox activity, but as practical actions and a genuine commitment to promoting the rights of Indigenous peoples. Key to this is the call to both member states and UN entities to develop and operationalize comprehensive rights-based disaggregated data frameworks in collaboration with Indigenous peoples. The lack of disaggregated data only compounds the invisibility of Indigenous peoples and hides the realities, inequalities, and discrimination confronting Indigenous peoples. We call on both member states and UN entities to embrace the knowledge and perspective of Indigenous peoples and to treat these insights as an invitation to work side by side towards shared solutions. We extend this invitation by encouraging member states and UN entities to utilize the recommendations of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as well as those from the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. To my fellow Indigenous peoples, as we meet at this 25th session, let us take this moment to reflect on our achievement and to honor the foundations of our ancestors and elders before us. Just as Haudenosaunee Chief Descahe traveled to Geneva over a century ago to speak to the League of Nations, we are here as Indigenous peoples that see the value in multilateralism and institutions like the United Nations. To Indigenous youth, I am so pleased to see you here. Your presence gives me hope. Like you, you know that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Indigenous peoples who have dedicated their lifetime working tirelessly for spaces such as this. Many of them started off as youth, just like you. I am filled with hope because I am reminded that in 20 years from now, the next generation of youth will be admiring your dedication and perseverance to maintain and uphold Indigenous peoples' rights. I extend my gratitude to my fellow forum members who commit their time and attention throughout the session and indeed the duration of their tenure as members to ensuring that the discussions held are intently heard and reflected in the report of this session. I also thank the Secretariat for their tireless work and support. Mechanisms such as the forum that promote, uphold, and defend the rights of Indigenous peoples are more important than ever. Let us continue to work in solidarity as Indigenous peoples, member states, and UN system and civil society to realize the rights of Indigenous peoples everywhere. I thank you. Distinguished members of the forum, distinguished delegates, we will now turn to the election of the other officers of the Forum's Bureau for the 25th session. In keeping with the Forum's practice, the Bureau will have 7 members, 1 chair, 5 vice chairs, and 1 rapporteur. We shall first proceed to the election of the vice chairs. I give the floor to distinguished forum member, Ms. Aluki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I take this opportunity to congratulate you on your re-election. I have the pleasure to nominate as vice chairs of the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Ms. Amina Amharic, Mr. Vals Ernstreitz, Ms. Leah Nicholas Mackenzie, Mr. Rodrigo Pailalev, and Ms. Emma Roson Tepato Olugito. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ms. Ailey Casquetalo Gito. I now give the floor to the distinguished forum member, Mr. Edward Porokwa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to congratulate you on your election. Further, I would like to second the nomination just put forward by Aluki as the Vice Chair of the 25th session of the forum, namely Mr. Val Astrid, Leah Nicholas Mackenzie, Rodrigo Pailalev, and Emma Rawson Tepatu. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Mr. Porokwa. May I take it that the forum wished to elect by acclamation Ms. Amina Amaret, Mr. Valtz N. Straits, Ms. Leah Nicholas Mackenzie, Mr. Rodrigo Pailalev, and Ms. Emma Rawson Tepato as vice chairs of the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues? It is so decided. We will now turn to the election of the rapporteur. I give the floor to the distinguished forum member, Mr. Suleiman Mamotov.
Сағоныз, бұл фырсатнен қуанып, сізні қайырламаға істейін бұл вазифенен. Those were a couple of words in my native Crimean Tatar language. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to congratulate you on your election as a chair. And it's an honor for me to nominate Ms. Jennifer Tauli-Corpus as rapporteur of the Forum's 25th session. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Mr. Momotov. I now give the floor to the distinguished forum member, Ms. Brenda Gunn.
Kinaskimita Noel. Tanshi, Madam Chair. I echo the congratulations on your election as chair. I would like to second the nomination of Ms. Jennifer Tally-Corpus from the Philippines as Rapporteur for the Forum's 25th session. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ako say, Marcy.
I thank Ms. Gunn. May I take it that the Forum wish to elect by acclamation Ms. Jennifer Tally-Corpus as the Rapporteur of the Forum's 25th session? It is so decided. I would like to congratulate the distinguished officers of the Bureau of the 25th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I really look forward to working with each of you. I now invite the Forum to proceed to Agenda Item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Organization of Work. The provisional agenda is contained in document E/C.19/2026/1, approved by the Economic and Social Council in its decision. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I just wanted to express again how wonderful it is to see so many of you here today. And I want to express a personal gratitude to Katisha, who was able to bring us in as forum members. I know last year we had another cultural performance, another cultural way to enter. And I think it brings us such a beautiful and grounded way to start our meeting as we gather as Indigenous peoples from across the globe. So I wanted to express that gratitude. And one of the things that as forum members, we meet really early in the morning and we continue meeting late into the evening. And this morning when I walked into our room, and I saw every single member, it felt like already we were succeeding. Because as you know, there are some years where not all members are able to arrive. And certainly this year was no different in terms of the challenges some of us face to be able to get the required documentation to be able to be here. But incredibly, we started off today our opening ceremony with all 16 of us here today. It is now my great pleasure to invite the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, to address the Permanent Forum.
Excellencies, dear friends, I'm pleased to welcome you to the 25th session of this vital forum. We gather here to build on an enduring truth. Indigenous peoples are bearers of cultures, knowledge, and ways of life that have sustained humanity for thousands of years. From the Amazon to Australia and Africa to the Arctic, you are the great guardians of nature, a living library of biodiversity conservation and champions of climate action. And your participation in global decision-making has never been more critical. Our world today is roiled by division and discord. We see conflicts over land and plundering of resources, non-stop environmental degradation, technologies that accelerate cultural erasure, and inequalities that endanger the health and dignity of millions. And too often, those who did the least to create these problems pay the heaviest price, especially indigenous peoples. This forum was established to address the persistent discrimination you face around the globe. This includes rampant violations of rights, often taking the form of physical violence and even deadly attacks on individuals and communities. Steep barriers to economic and social development, grave threats to language and culture, relentless encroachment on ancestral lands, from unlicensed logging that drives deforestation to illegal mining that poisons soil, groundwater, rivers, and food with mercury, cyanide, and other pollutants. Rising sea levels that imperil small island developing states. School curricula that devalue the knowledge and histories of indigenous peoples, and health systems that perpetuate inequities in the prevention and treatment of infectious and chronic diseases. Excellencies and dear friends, this permanent forum has made significant gains in combating these injustices, starting with its role in securing the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples 2 decades ago. And the momentum continues. We can see it in the Pact for the Future and the Declaration on Future Generations, which affirm your rightful role in shaping the world of tomorrow. And you can see it in the Doha Political Declaration, where member states committed to supporting indigenous peoples with full respect for their identity, traditions, forms of social organization, and cultural values, as well as the right to participate in decision-making processes. Through it all, this forum has provided a unique space where indigenous peoples from all regions can come together and be heard. And this is why we must protect and strengthen it, ensuring it remains open, inclusive, and consequential. And why we are working across the UN system to strengthen the architecture for advancing indigenous peoples' rights. Excellencies, dear friends, your theme for this session is a pivotal one. For indigenous peoples, health is inseparable from your lands, waters, languages, cultures, and ecosystems. When one is harmed, all are affected. And this is especially true in the context of conflict, when displacement from ancestral lands, loss of livelihoods, food insecurity, destruction of sacred sites, and disruption of cultural traditions can put health at risk. Also the case with contaminated water, which has immediate and intergenerational consequences on health and well-being. For indigenous peoples, water is life, sacred and central to identity and survival. That is why the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including SDG 6 on safe water, must continue to guide our actions. Ensuring no one is left behind begins here. Mother Earth is sending urgent signals. Storms intensify, glaciers melt, seas rise, droughts grow more frequent, and floods get more severe. And indigenous peoples respond with knowledge and care. Your wisdom offers solutions the world urgently needs. We must listen, learn, and act. But in too many venues and processes, the participation of indigenous peoples remains limited by practical, political, or institutional barriers. And progress at the international level has not always translated into real change on the ground. We must recognize these realities and take steps to ratify them. I see 4 areas where action is critical. First, all member states must honor their commitments under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that includes embedding the rights of indigenous peoples in national laws and policies. And it means ensuring free, prior and informed consent for actions affecting their lands, territories and resources. Second, the UN system and member states must ensure the full, meaningful and direct participation of indigenous peoples at all levels, supported by adequate and sustained financing. And this must extend beyond global forums to national and local levels where decisions are made and impacts are felt. Third, societies everywhere must take immediate and concrete steps to protect indigenous peoples, their leaders and human rights defenders, and to address the violence and risks they face. Their individual and collective rights must be respected and upheld. And fourth, we must all work to ensure that indigenous women and girls can participate meaningfully in decisions that affect their lives. Their knowledge, leadership, and perspectives must shape the way forward. Excellencies, dear friends, the
United Nations exists so all peoples from across the world can come together to address shared challenges. This must include indigenous peoples in all their diversity. In this time of profound global uncertainty, their wisdom and experience can guide us back from the brink. Together, let us work to realize the rights of indigenous peoples everywhere and build a better future for all of humanity. I thank you.